Welcome to Beyond the Cards. I am Allison DiNicola, your host, and today it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Daniel Ahearn, here, author of the Pathwork Oracle. We're going to get to talk about that card deck. Here I have the boxed art here. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking time out
Sure.
to chat. And before we get started talking, I'm just going to read a little bit that you share with me about your bio so that the
Okay.
listeners and watchers will have a little of that background. So, Daniel is a dedicated therapist, meditation teacher, and attachment specialist based in Los Angeles. I want to hear more about that. With over 20 years of experience in meditation and a focus on attachment repair, he empowers individuals and communities to cultivate resilience and restore meaningful connections. As Director of Culture for Ascend Healthcare, Daniel integrates mindfulness, eco psychology, and social justice principles into his work, fostering healing and well-being. He co-created the Pathwork Oracle, a unique tool designed to help individuals explore Dharma practice by synthesizing Tibetan Buddhist principles with the wisdom of Yidam. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yidam.
Yidam. Noble Green Tara. Daniel is also the co-founder of the wellness community Your Zen Life and a proud father of two boys.
Very
So
proud.
beautiful.
Thank
That sounds
you.
like a really rich, um,
Well,
all-encompassing life that you're leading.
thank
Lots
you.
of
Yeah,
things involved in.
it feels full. It feels very fulfilling. I'm very proud of all these things that I get to spend my time doing. And I think I think I'm kind of lazy. I want them all to be like one thing, like these underlying principles that are so interesting to me. I want to explore them in all dimensions of my life, fatherhood, partnership, artistic exploration, like this Oracle deck, psychotherapy, and Dharma. Like, what does it mean to live a life so engaged? So I feel very fortunate that I'm allowed to do that.
Beautiful. I love that. Would you just share with us a little bit about how you got started? Obviously, this is your livelihood, right? This is what you're doing, your life's work. But how did you get started on this spiritual path?
Oh man, right?
Yeah.
Probably to a lot of people, like a lot of people, I think there's like an aspect of suffering or dissatisfaction maybe, but also curiosity. Um, like I grew up in a Catholic household, so I was curious about that. I was curious about the teachings in the gospel and this idea of this person, Jesus, and I was interested in religion, but also rebellious against the concept of organized religion. I lived mainly with my mother, and she was interested in sort of witchy, esoteric stuff. So there was always in the ambience of
Mm,
my life, like, well, what is this stuff? Um, in terms of Dharma, I think I came into contact with the idea of what we call Buddhism in college, and I had a lot of ignorance around it. I didn't like a traditional teaching in Dharma is the Four Noble Truths, and it
mhm.
starts with this idea that existence is suffering, and I really didn't like that. It smacked me of Judeo-Christian sort of idea of life will be better after, but this life is suffering. I've come to understand that really differently now. But in that, it piqued my interest. What is this idea of stillness and meditation? Like, what is this all about? And I stumbled around with it for a great many years, trying different things, exploring, going on little retreats here and there, trying to find teachers. And then around 2004, I really kind of locked in to sitting and like actually just figuring it out and trying to understand like what happens when you quiet your body and restrict external phenomena and sort of notice what arises. And if you've done that, you know that what arises is like so painful and confusing and
Mhm.
noisy. And then I was interested in exploring how to tame that, how to slow that down and see what was underneath. And in using meditation, discovering those moments of stillness and openness and what I've come to understand, like sacredness in the world around us, that if we can quiet our mind and still ourselves, like there's this sacred world around us all the time. And I've been pursuing of that. Um, And I've had really, really beautiful teachers, and I've had the good fortune of discovering teachers within the Dharma who are very interested in attachment, which I'm happy to get into, and
Hmm.
how those things come together. Um, and I've been sort of on that path ever since. I study a particular type of spiritual practice that's parallel to Buddhism, but it's not quite Buddhist. It's called Bun, Bon. I
Hmm.
have the good fortune of working with people at the Mustang Bun Foundation to kind of proliferate and share these teachings, which have been so powerful, and they really inform a lot of the work that went into this deck. Uh, all these practices of consciousness and I guess what we'd call emotional intelligence and ethical training to engage in the world moment to moment. And there's a lot of really beautiful work that we're doing with the Mustang Bond Foundation to bring these very precious, sacred indigenous teachings from Nepal and Tibet into the West so Westerners can experience them and experiment them and absorb them into their own culture and see what they look like. Like we're not a monastic culture. So when we talk about using meditation, we talk about doing these things, like what exactly do we mean when we're
Hmm.
on the 405 freeway or we have to go to Trader Joe's or you're a household or a parent with children and you're dealing with this world. How do we do these things? And that really interests me. It really interests me,
Awesome.
that
Yeah.
exploration.
It's amazing. I was, had the privilege of meeting some Bond teachers in New York way back in when the Open Center was still there,
Wow.
and back in, probably 15 years ago or so. And a lot of what I gathered out of that actually was a healing. It was a shamanic healing practice, and they brought their kind of shamanic healing with flowers. How they were doing like flower healing,
Oh,
and I just felt like that was such a sacred thing that they were sharing with this group.
yes.
It was really amazing. So definitely caught my attention as lots of things coming out of those Eastern teachings that the world needs today. I
Mhm.
mean, and more and more people gravitating to that, wanting to know more about it and um, learn maybe another path or another way, right, to get there. That's
You
what
know,
we're seeing in the world out there in this moment that we're recording this, right? We're just like, oh yeah, we need to we need to follow maybe a different path, follow a different way.
I'm so curious about it because I think maybe we would agree that the world inside is the world that we see
Hmm.
outside. And like if you
Absolutely.
really want, as my teacher will say, if you want to have peace in the world, like you have to have peace in your life, in your home, in your family, in your heart, in your speech, which maybe isn't as cinematic as getting out there and fighting for peace or like trying to convince other people of the necessity for peace, but to carry that with you. I think that's very interesting work. And, this idea that you had contact with these teachings 15 years ago, understanding that, as someone that studies mental health, the Western conceptualization of mental health is like 120 years old, maybe.
Hmm.
And these are people and practices that have been studying and mapping consciousness for thousands of years in like very formal, ritualized ways that I think there's this Western bias, like, oh, it's like a religion or what are they doing? It's like, no, this is about actually noticing how you're
Hmm.
experiencing moment to moment phenomena and then how you're responding to it and slowing down. Also, it's so cool because, this will be on, YouTube or some sort of social media thing, yeah? And that's a rad way that's developed that we can now interact. I can sit and study with teachers that are far away and they can
Hmm.
learn about the West. It's an exciting time for this expansion and exploration of all of these teachings and all of these concepts. I'm like a chronic optimist that good
I
things
like that.
are ahead.
Yeah, and I agree. And so I always, kind of have that same thought of, well, we just start with ourselves, right? We just start with ourselves. So it's
Yeah.
clearing your light, you know, firming up your boundaries, being your best, being the best that you can be in the world, and doing all of your work, and then raising for lack of a better way to say it, because it is a kind of a trendy way to say, raising your frequency or your vibration.
Yeah,
But then you affect others that are around you. So if you can be that, peaceful person, then the people
yeah,
that you live with will feel like, oh, I'm in this vibration or frequency of feeling peaceful. And then the people that are in contact with them can be like, oh, I really like coming over to your house. I always had that with my kids. My kids are grown, but
um,
everyone wanted to come to our place, and they were like, oh, your mom's really cool, and she's got that big Shiva in the living room, and there's always like chanting music going, and there's incense, and that had nothing to do with it's just like I like that in the house. I like that kind of, clearing, but it was more about, that our family was very, very equanimous and peaceful, and it was always a great space. So everybody wanted to come into it. And so that was a nice neighborhood legacy to have at the time, right?
yeah. Like
Yeah.
what a beautiful environment
Yeah.
to create for young people. Like a lot of the work that I do is with teenagers, and I find it so fundamental to just offer an option. There's like another way that you could be. Like you don't have to, take on Shiva practice or do
Yeah.
corporations with me or do these mudras, but like just know that there are other things out there. That alone is so helpful for teens as they continue to get like squeezed,
Hmm.
attention continues to get squeezed in this current environment, just to give them a place of like breath and calm to be with, I think is really a beautiful offering. It's
Yeah.
funny you said flowers because this is a flower mudra shirt from the bone. So
Oh.
when you make altar offerings to flowers, you can do it with your hands. This mudra
Hmm.
is to actually bring peace into the realms of conflict. So it's apropos that we're speaking about it today.
Yeah. Love that. So tell us, let's talk about the Pathwork Oracle, because just curious about how this got started,
Yeah.
how you guys connected, you and Anna, if you knew each other. She's the artist who did all the drawings. I'm just going to
Yeah.
give a little preview. This is the box cover
Yeah, she's so great.
and the book cover for those of you who are watching. Um,
Yeah, I didn't know her. These things are so curious asking about the spiritual path and how you found it and what happened. There was like a moment in my life where things were a little tricky with certain relationships, and I went to go see a friend of mine, and she did this tarot reading. I'm like, oh, it's so interesting. Tarot, I hadn't really given much thought, me myself. And then I got really into the Tarot de Marseille, the Jodorowsky deck,
mhm,
really just tweaked on that, and like, oh, this is so interesting, and archetypes and consciousness. And I thought it was like a very powerful tool. Again, for adolescents, you'd give a teenager a card and what do you see? And then what they see is sort of corresponding almost like a tarot Rorschach of like what's in their unconscious and what they're responding to. And this is gives them good insight, and it gives you an opportunity to collaborate with them and draw things forth. So it's a beautiful tool, like psychotherapeutic tool. And around that time, I was working with my friends, Mark and Teresa, and Years on Life, and trying to figure out what to do with it in social media and like what that should be. And I got an email from Ana about this idea. Hey, if you ever want to do a tarot deck, let me know. And I was immediately like, yes, I do. And it really just felt very bright and immediate. Yes, I do. And I want to do it around Noble Green Tara. And I wanted to bring in this idea, and I'm happy to talk about Noble Green Tara, this idea like strong, conscious, compassionate, feminine energy. I'd love to use it as a tool. I'd love to just have that more in consciousness with people. I think one thing that's really awesome and interesting and sort of magically about spirituality is like the time that you spend with these concepts and you speak them into consciousness, they gather weight and power.
mhm,
You and I talking about consciousness and tools of consciousness and evoking Shiva or sort of bringing in the teachings of the bond, give it energy in a time where there are a lot of things competing for your energy.
mhm,
Probably not, I don't want to judge everything, but probably not all of them are helpful or healthy. So I like this idea of bringing Tara front and center. There's this deity, this tutelary deity, this Yidam Tara, that in certain practices, you would imagine Tara and you would think about how great Tara is. and the power of Tara. And then you go through this visualization of becoming Tara and
Hmm.
engaging in that complete compassion and then moving through the world that way. And as a technology, I think that's incredible. Like, what skillful technology to use your mind to focus on an image, to understand that that image has all these positive qualities, to see yourself become that, to feel all those positive qualities psychospiritually, maybe even physiologically, and then to get up and move through the world as your framework. That's so skillful. What a way to train the mind and the body and your emotions. So I was very into Tara, and I started to communicate with Ana about this, and we talked about what we could do. And over time, it became clear that it wasn't a tarot deck, right?
Hmm.
Because that's a set system of cards,
Hmm.
whole undertaking, and it became an oracle deck, which I knew nothing about. I know nothing about tarot, and even less about oracle decks. So I asked some friends in the world about oracle decks and spent time with them and come to understand them as like a spiritual adjunct and support that are sort of outside the world of tarot, but you can pull a card and it can inform some thought or some feeling or bring something to the surface. And this really interests me. Originally the oracle deck was going to be around 28 cards, and
Hmm.
the idea was you'd pull a card a day, 7 days a week for 4 weeks. And then we decided we wanted to expand upon that. So it's really about a tool to get people into the habit of spending time with these concepts. If they want to spend time with these concepts, for some, there are corresponding meditations so they can go deeper, and see how they make sense in their life. And she's a brilliant artist, as you know, and like a real visionary, as I'm sure you know. So getting into the weeds with her and sort of looking at these cards and figuring out how to connect certain attributes with certain elements and certain colors and certain language was just really fun and like a spiritual practice in and of itself.
Awesome. I love I love the creative aspect. I've written several card decks myself. Two of them are mudra decks, so I've been in that,
Cool.
deep into that world. But I just wanted to mention, this is just funny. I taught a goddess class yesterday on Tara and Durga,
Wow.
like
See?
a kind of somatic embodiment. So it's just interesting, right? You can't make it up. We're just like at the alignment point, and so it's and so from my point of view, because I'm not, I'm not like deep into, like a, kind of learning practice in Buddhism, but the goddesses have always called me from different traditions to align with them. And so I'm called to do that with my students and people that I lead as a kind of an embodiment practice to say, if you need these qualities, you need this, you need this compassion, you need this wisdom, you're just going to merge, you're going to merge. This is, I'm giving you the short shrift of it, but, you're going to merge with this being of
Right.
light and take that on and ask to be, aligned with this energy. And it's really
Yeah.
powerful to watch. So it's really cool that we're talking about this right now.
Yeah,
And,
but it's interesting, right? The
yeah.
way they coincide, you can call them
Mhm.
serendipitous or coincidental, but there are things operating. And look, we need to acknowledge like the language sounds goofy to be like the spiritual world and the spiritual realm, and it can sound a little like, what are you talking about? But if you spend time with these practices, there is something beyond material, beyond
Absolutely.
like organized sense of personality consciousness. There is an awareness and people in many different dimensions of science and psychology, and obviously in Dharma and lineage have tried to name this awareness, this primordial wisdom, this awakened awareness, this sort of meta consciousness, this metacognitive field that we can tap into. And if you're spending time with these images that have, through time, represented all of these positive qualities, so people for hundreds, thousands of years have been energizing and pulling energy from these concepts, then they continue to gather energy. And I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, I love it. I did pull some core. First, I wanted to just talk about the how you put the deck together.
Sure.
And so I see that there's like a color coding, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you categorize the things. Can you talk a little bit to that of how you decided to put the decks together? Because I can imagine just from our just couple of minutes of talking that there's so many there's so many things you'd want to represent, right? How do I choose? I think it's
Yes.
interesting for listeners to find out how creators, how do I choose? How do I map out the framework? What do I want to be included in this?
Mhm.
Because we can't, of course, include everything. So if you could just
No.
speak a little
Yeah.
bit to that, that would be great.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I think there was a lot of thought that went into synthesizing a bunch of things without getting too lost in it.
Hmm.
So maybe we'll just talk about a couple to give people an orientation. So it fundamentally, not just in Buddhism, there are teachings called the Brahma Viharas, right? So th we've seen this, it's hashtagged a lot, metta, so there's metta, which is loving kindness.
Hmm.
And then there's compassion. So the Brahmaviharas are four. There's love, essentially, compassion, joy, essentially, and equanimity, often called loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy in this deck. And if you think about these things as independent ways of operating, they're a very positive focus. So, like loving kindness is open-hearted curiosity for people. So you sort of move through the world with this sense of wonder. As the great Abraham Heschel says, radical amazement, which is an amazement for things. It doesn't mean you're foolish, doesn't mean you're letting everyone take advantage of you, but you have this openness. There's loving kindness, there's compassion, which is understanding the suffering of all sentient beings, and you could spend a lot of time with that. There's sympathetic joy, which is this celebration of good fortunes for other people, and equanimity, which is evenness, right? And I could go crazy on all of these, but that's just like a general idea. And we wanted to bring these into the cards because I think training of those things complement one another. So by this, I mean, if you're working in loving kindness, it actually engenders an openness to compassion. If you have compassion, it can kind of open you up to the sympathetic joy. If you have access to these things, it can engage you to develop a sense of evenness and equanimity. So using those broad strokes and inviting Tara into all these images around different demographics, essentially, right? Our deck is organized around using the Brahmaharas for a loved one, a difficult person, for all sentient beings, and for self, right? So those four dimensions. Um, and then on top of that, we brought in the elements. So if we just talk about loving kindness, you can see there's a lot of the element of fire, right? This purifying fire, just to sort of, obviously, I think it supports the image, but it evokes this idea of a processing, an
Hmm.
alchemical sort of shifting, which we thought was really powerful. With compassion, where'd they go? We brought in water, so you'll find water represented in all the cards. Now, there are obviously, as I know you know, um, a, a lot of different interpretations of what water would be. There's different systems of how we look at water within the body. There's different chakras. This deck kind of pulls from a bunch of different things. And again, the idea is to inform people that these things exist. And if something piques their curiosity, maybe they want to take a deeper dive. This is not like a defined set system where it's like this is the path work and there's
Hmm.
it's really open-ended and try and be egalitarian and invite people into spending time with these concepts. So that's some of the thoughts that went into that first part of the deck.
I love it. I'm trying to think what else caught my eye right out of the box because I have been uh, working with them. Some of the
Oh, I'd love to hear about working with them.
yeah, I just have been playing around with them, and so it's interesting because this card kept coming up for me,
Uh,
and the desire card with the peacock and the yeah, so I was like, I love that you included things that maybe are challenging to look at or
mm,
just talking about the difficult person
mm,
because while that exists, it's not something that is like, brought up as a topic. Maybe in tarot it is in a way, right? In the
yeah.
symbolic way, but it's just, it's almost like, you know, asking the user to really explore their own mind to say, where is this within you? Where is this within you? What is, So yeah, so I was reflecting on like what am I what is it that I am craving or desiring or and like is that creating something for me?
Right.
In it that could be negative, or is it something that I need to just
Mhm.
accept
Mhm.
and as like part of who I am and create more wholeness. So it's a good psychological you
Yeah, right.
know, inquiry when you give me going on some of the cards, like, oh crap,
Right.
I have to take a look at myself today and say, where is it that I am maybe desiring or feeling that like pull? And is it negative or is it, just about me accepting that I am everything kind of concept, you
Yeah,
know?
the book is, it's interesting that you mentioned this way, so you pulled one of the Buddha cards. There's five transcendental Buddhas, foundational Buddhas. If you get into Tantra, right, the Buddhas represent their own elements. They have their own mounts or animal representation, which is why you brought it in the card. They work with these underlying, if you want to call them afflictions, like desire. I don't know if they're afflictions or just
Mm,
experiences, and they can help you look at it. And again, just to give people like a sampler of these ideas in Vajrayana and Bon and Buddhism at large. Like, oh, there are these things that you can work with. And what a good example. Like you pull this card and it's like a beautiful peacock, right? It's just like beautiful. It's such a beautiful illustration, right? This beautiful peacock on top of a lotus, and it's striking. It's like, oh, great. Wait, desire. Wait, is that bad? Am I supposed, wait, is it vanity? Like even that just that peaceful disruption to the mind stream to look at these things, I think is so interesting.
mm,
If you have a practice, let's say you took this card with you around throughout the day and like, oh, I want a cheeseburger. It's like, oh, but desire, wow, it's like, oh, I really don't want this to happen. Oh, I desire something to be different. Whatever it is, like just that insight, I find these things keeps us present, keeps us open to new opportunities. It like frees up rigidity. It just seems a more interesting way to me to spend your time than certainty, moving through the world with certainty and
mm-hmm,
the absence of curiosity. Again, as someone who works in mental health, I find curiosity to be fundamental to mental health and well-being. Like when
mm-hmm,
we're curious, we tend to be in a healthier place. When we're sort of looking at rigidity and certainty, there's a lot of underlying stress. So
mm-hmm.
not knowing and a curiosity is a principle, I think, to overall well-being.
Do you see when you guys were creating this, do you see this as a teaching deck or a learning deck for people, like a way
Mm.
for people to take a deeper self-learning? Like what do you
I,
hope that people gather
right. Thank
from
you so
using
much.
this?
Fundamentally, I was so psyched that like people would learn about Tara. Like that's so cool. Like just people knowing about Tara, I think is cool.
Hmm.
Just like I don't know why, I just think it's like awesome. Tara was such like a beautiful opening for me in practice. It's turned me a lot again to certain aspects of these powerful technologies in Vajrayana and Bon practices that I think are so fulfilling and so deep, and I want to keep exploring. And Tara was like kind of my gateway into that.
Hmm.
Um, what ideally it'd be so incredible if people get the deck and they get into it and they pull a card and they're curious and they go online, they listen to a meditation and they learn something about themselves and they develop a calmness and they develop an interest in meditation. Like, I mean, I'm not, this is no surprise. I think everyone should be meditating a lot. I think people should be spending time in practice, not just sitting in like quiet practice, but like being out in the world in conscious practice. Because to your point, I think I don't want to say there's a war against consciousness, but there's a lot of factors contributing to keeping people unconscious and or sort of in this sleep stage of consciousness. And so we're irritable and we're argumentative. We're not thinking clearly. When you are waking up, well, waking up is can be painful, of course, right? You're in
Hmm.
that liminal space, but to be awake is to recognize this is incredible. This is our life. We are alive. We have consciousness. We can do something with that. What would we be fighting about? Why? couldn't we figure out a way to connect? I don't have to get along with everybody. Like I can let people do their thing. But the fact that it's like 2024 and a lot of our when we don't get along, we resort to killing each other seems like so wild to me. Like we have
Hmm.
beyond that. Like what a shame. What a waste of this gift of consciousness. So, and I'm not trying to be grandiose. I mean this like in a practical way. Like,
Yeah, I think people will agree with you. It's not, I don't think it's a weird concept that you're saying. It's just we think that we are such an accelerated species because of, the technology that we've been able to develop and the things that we've been able to do. And even things like being able to make water in the desert, and things that we never dreamed would be possible, but we're still doing the same barbaric things that we've been doing for thousands of years. So
yeah,
there's got to
right.
come a point. What I really wanted to ask you, just as a curiosity question for me, is about mental health in young people, and the just the rising tide of anxiety for so many young people. And do you believe that lack of I want to say of having this kind of a practice or
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing could really be something that could shift this general.
Oh
It
my
seems
God.
like there's a generational thing. I don't want to even name numbers because that's not fair, but I do think there's a whole generation
Mm,
of young people, whether they're teenagers, young adults, whatever, that are just driven by anxiety.
mm.
And I just have a curiosity about it because I have my own thoughts about, just being disconnected from the elements, from nature, from just that kind of thing. um
I'm sure we would agree about all of it, really. And you naming that, I think, is yes, definitely part of it. I have a dear friend, and practitioner, and we talk about, well, what was the original disconnect? Like what was it that set us off so separate from nature? And we could spend a lot of time with that. To answer your question, do I think it's harder to be a teenager than it's ever been? Yes, I do. Do I think that we are raising children? And let's talk about the West. Let's talk about America. We are overworked as adults. We don't have time because we're racing around trying to afford everything and keep up. So we outsource some of that parenting to, I guess, like third parties and media, and the kids are growing up with devices. This isn't an anti-device thing, but the
yeah,
kids
yeah.
are growing up in a culture where they're distracted. And then when you're distracted, you are anxious, right? This is not a hot take, right? Do we understand that the children in our culture witness around 2,000 advertisements a day? That seems like torture. That's like how you would torture someone, right? Like it would be Clockwork Orange, and you're just like watching media all day. So if children, as they reach adolescence and their brain develops and they get hit with hormones, suddenly are recognizing in their bodies like, oh, this feels awful. Our answer usually is, well, let's prescribe them medication and let's keep them compliant to get them through the day. I think this is grotesque. I think understanding that teens have every right and in terms of the culture they live in, their response is appropriate. When I work with teens and they're like, I'm depressed, it's like, of course you're depressed. I'm anxious. Of course you're anxious. How could you not be? Everyone around you is anxious. Your family's anxious. The world is anxious. For you to be expressing it doesn't make you an aberration. Like, I think there's an opportunity to turn in to support these teens and collaborate with them. And like, well, let's actually help them understand that their response is appropriate and help together find healthy ways to do something about that. Do I think contemplation and meditation and these practices and pulling cards and consciousness is absent? Yes. Do I think it'd be fundamentally a game changer for adolescents? For sure. That's like the principle of why I got into adolescent care. I think that attachment work and consciousness work and Dharma are like very deeply threaded, especially if you look at eco-psychology, right? That connection to nature, because most maladaptive behaviors And maladaptive views come from feeling separate from, other than, left out of. And nature is a big part of that, like feeling independent and separate from nature and freaked out by nature. Um, so I think all of these practices, any way to get into a teen's like creative energy and life force and help them feel not crazy for feeling so crazy in a world that's so crazy, right?
I like it. So let's prescribe the Pathwork Oracle for
Yeah, I'm
everybody.
mindful of not sounding like, I don't want to like say
No,
that.
no.
I think whatever practice, gets you into sort of reflecting on a couple of things. You asked how I got
Mhm.
into essentially spirituality. I think that expression, like one of the points of turning of like, oh, I'm alive. Whoa, I'm like not going to be alive forever. I am alive right now. What am I doing with that? And
Mhm.
I think impressing that upon teens who, my experience, a lot of teens show up with the list of diagnoses. Like, oh, I'm this, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this. And like you're a person on Earth, and we're like hurling through space. Like it's already weird. Like maybe you're just a person, and maybe we can figure it out. And I'm not um, sort of glossing over uh, like clinical anxiety and clinical depression. I'm not, and no
Mhm.
part of me is saying
Yeah,
like pull the card
totally
and
agree.
go for it at
No,
all.
totally agree. And that wasn't what I meant. I just think,
Yeah, no, I know.
yeah, I
I just,
think what you put together is a really nice framework for, everybody, including young people, to kind of explore those concepts or things that nobody's talking about with them, that it's just like not part of the family dinner conversation. How are you feeling? What does it mean to be, kids are just dealing with bullying, unkindness, all those kinds of things. What does it
well,
mean to be a person who is, out, in the world and being in compassion for other people? And so I just
yeah,
think how you put it together could be really accessed by lots of different groups. So, yeah,
I
good
appreciate
job.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I love working with men and teens, young men, and sort of pushing back against this again, this idea of Tara. It's like this powerful feminine strength, of compassion. I don't, Tara's no longer in my shed, but you have two like feminine deities. One is very compassionate and one is like very ferocious. And
Hmm.
I think these things are important. I think, look, you want to zoom out and look at like the patriarchy being a problematic lens. It's a problematic lens, and within that, you have men continuing to cause harm because they're unconscious about the power of femininity and the sacredness, and then they sort of degrade their own sacred masculinity. And I think touching into these practices can reestablish an understanding of sacred masculinity and what to do with that. And you look at the exploitation of teenage boys, like they're just sort of fed to consumerism and fed to all these archetypes that are so vulgar and so degrading of them and through them, and then violent to young girls. Like it's this system that we are not passively participants, we're active participants in and existing. So pushing into this and saying like, well, what does it mean to hold kindness and compassion in your heart to someone you don't like? If you're only kind to people you like, is that kindness?
Hmm.
Like, do you want to be a person who's responding to the external, or do you want to be operating from a place of like wholeness in yourself? And then if you do want to do that, how do you want to do that? When you look at what teenagers are offered of like what is success, and it's jarring. It's like that's success, this like random amount of wealth or having strangers look up to you. Like these are really bereft systems that are suffering and cause suffering consciously and
Hmm.
unconsciously. And while I'm here, I'm interested in like piercing that and shaking that up and trying to shine a light on it. And yeah, don't get it twisted. Like go out, make a lot of money, ball out, do whatever you want to do for sure. But like, who are you and what are you about? What do you care about? And if you only care about if you're only operating from a place of reactivity, there's going to be problems. Like, what do you actively engage with? What are you aligned with? And again, these things really fascinate me. Like, how do we make use of them? How do we express them? How do we train in them, right? If we understand that meditation is really about training, you're training the mind to control the mind and look at the more subtle states of consciousness. And then in that, in the subtle states of consciousness, come into sacredness. Like, how do you train teams who are like being waterboarded 24/7 with nonsense?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think we could keep going. I honestly think we're just touching the tip of the iceberg, but yeah, thanks for really sharing that. It's really I think it's really important for people to think about and to hear about and in agreement. I have two, like I said, two young adult sons that are artists
Mhm.
and are great human beings and very compassionate and loving, kind, and I'm super proud of who they are out in the world, but I know that who they are is, it's not, it's taking their own effort to maintain that. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
They have that, and they're just, they're just not, they never were kind of following that path. So
Mhm.
grateful, but you know, it's definitely something that's happening and surfaces and arises through different groups of people I deal with. So I always like to hear, hear how we see, the evolution, the next generation, and they do love to work with these experiential
Yeah,
products like the
right.
cards. So,
Got
there's really lots and lots and lots of young people reading
Mhm.
tarot, using oracles, doing Lenormand, doing predictive kinds of things. It really
Mhm.
helps them, I think, to have the conversations
Mhm.
about doing readings and then conversing about
Right.
where they are. And oh, look, because it takes them away from themselves out into this other piece of media that's showing them the mirror, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, how do I solve this? So it's all good.
How
The
do I look?
last, yeah,
You know, how am I even looking at it? I don't mean to cut you off.
yeah, no worries.
It's so interesting if were to, for example, pull a card and think about the phrase, may you see things as they are. And you're sort of practicing that all day long. And you're sort of bringing that to the front of your consciousness for a teen or an adult to be like, how am I operating, spending time with this? And these are esoteric practices, right? They're not for everyone. To know about them is cool. Maybe 3 out of 100 will really want to get into it. But to understand, oh, I can actually eject the autopilot tape that's on repeat in my mind and try and offer something new and practice that and see what happens is cool. And I think teens are open to it because it's not more of the same. It's like, hey, if you actually flip that out for a second and practice this, you'll notice something different. Now, will you, after this experience is over, go and spend time on that? Like you're competing against all the forces that are telling you to do something else?
Hmm.
I don't know, but it's worth a try. And it's like a cool experience to share with teens and adults.
Awesome.
You were
I wanted
saying,
to I
yeah,
wanted to ask you if you had I always ask whoever I'm chatting with if they have some other superpower or special, yeah, superpower. I know you probably do have, I mean, it seems like you have a lot of superpowers, but it could be a fun fact that maybe people don't normally know about you, something that you'd be
yeah.
willing to share.
Yeah, I would share anything. I feel like it's all pretty obvious. Like I'm this dude. I look like this dude. This is like how I roll. I don't know if I have like other hobbies outside of like studying these things because I come at it from, maybe I should have said this. I come at it from like a very artist-centered world. I used to work in music and I liked writing and I like sort of touching into the etheric, like songwriting and song creation is very much, I think, like a transmission the way Dharma is. You sort of open yourself up and you get this song and they become like prayers and love songs to the universe. So I've sort of folded all that energy into this. Any like hidden talents or superpowers, I don't know. I'm not even
Yeah,
trying to
I
be
think
like,
yeah, I think the songwriting is
songwriting is
cool.
good.
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
I
It's
used to
not
write.
it doesn't have to be like, I actually fly, a spaceship on the weekends or something like that. Just, it's just interesting.
My superpower is like the amount of joy I get from being a father to my children is like outrageous. Like to be able to be in participation and to be a steward of a young man, right? I have a son who's a young man, this beautiful young man, and this baby, and to watch them and to help sort of model and be curious and wonder and watch masculinity in a cool way. Like I can't even tell you. It's a super privilege more than power.
Hmm.
And I say that because it wasn't. a guarantee. I'll get into it in another podcast, but coming from the bloodline that I've come from, like that wasn't necessarily what was going to happen with being a father, particularly to young boys. So that privilege and that opportunity and that sacredness and that's like incredible gift is not lost on me, not for one day, not for one moment. You know?
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's
Sure.
really been a pleasure chatting with you, and best of luck with the Pathwork Oracle, and continuing to get all of these concepts out in the world. I did want to mention we will put your contact information and your social media up
Cool.
when this comes up, but I did want to mention that in the back of the book, there is a little QR code too, and
Yeah.
you can QR code Daniel there. And I think there's some meditation downloads. Is that correct?
That is
That go
correct. So
along with this?
yeah, like 22 of the cards, there are guided short meditations. So if you're curious about meditation, they're bite size. Um, and yeah, if anyone ever wants to talk about this or geek out at depth, I'm down. I appreciate it. I hope I answered enough questions about the depth
Yeah,
and all the
beautiful.
that went into it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Daniel. It was a pleasure. All right. Till next time. Thank you.